Now, we're looking at the idea of attacking out of close guard bottom position. The general insight that I'm trying to give you is that guard position by its very nature is defined as a neutral position. Okay, you don't get any points for pulling guard. The understanding is it's just a neutral situation. It's not like you have done anything special by getting to guard position. As a general rule in Jiu-Jitsu, we strongly favor the idea of dominance or some kind of positional advantage before we actually start attacking people. So in order to be effective from guard, it very much behooves us to find some form of dominance. It may not be complete or crushing dominance, but some kind of advantage while we're inside a neutral position. And then the chances of success when we go to attack will go up astronomically. We started the ball rolling with what I believe is probably the single strongest first attack you can have on an opponent whenever they're on two knees inside your closed guard. And this is a transition to a side scissor. This was a central part of the game of one of my greatest companions in grappling, Hodge Gracie, and he used it with tremendous success over the years. But let's be honest, you can't always get the elbow all the way across the center line. People, they're not fools. They understand what you're trying to do. The game itself is relatively easy to read. It's hard to stop, but it's easy to read. And you're going to get opponents who are vociferously pulling away and preventing you getting the elbow all the way across the center line. So what's the next step in our attempt to attack effectively out of closed guard? Well, if I can't get the elbow across the center line, I can at the very least bring it closer to the center line. And if that may well be enough for me to go into the move we're about to look at now, the top lock. Okay. I'm going to talk first about what a top lock is and why it's a good thing. Okay, in a closed guard, my feet and ankles typically cross around my opponent's lower back. You must start thinking about your opponent's spine for what it is. It's a long lever, arguably the longest lever in the human body, to which a heavy weight is attached on one end. When I put my ankles at the base of my training partner's spine and cross, I'm grabbing the short end of the lever so that it's relatively easy for my opponent to posture up, and now it's very difficult for me to start pulling them forward. Let's contrast that with a situation where I was able to cross my ankles high up behind my training partner's neck. Now I'm at the opposite end of the lever, and when my opponent goes to posture up and away, it's incredibly difficult, and I can use my legs to pull in. Okay, and you will often see different proponents of jiu-jitsu utilizing this simple principle. The idea that as my legs go higher and higher up the lever of my training partner's spine, I get more and more control of my training partner's posture. So by the time my ankles cross around my opponent's shoulders and head, you're really in a very, very strong leverage position. As your opponent goes to posture up now, it becomes much more difficult for them, and we can start pulling with much more effect with our knees, as opposed to a situation where I'm all the way down here at the short end of the lever. Now when he postures up, the pull of my knees is much less effective. Okay? So, what do we need in order to get this high lock, this top lock, into operation? What I need is to be able to bring his elbows towards the center line. If we just change the angle, and back a little. Okay. Let's understand that if Mateus has his elbows outside my hips, it's impossible for me to get a top lock because my hips are being blocked by his two elbows, and there's simply no way I can bring my legs effectively up his spine. That's why you will often see jiu-jitsu players who are head on points stall inside a closed guard by hunkering down, by grabbing the two lapels and putting their elbows wide down by the hips. And this kind of negative play has a logic to it because it freezes my hips in place. It makes it very difficult for me to play a high guard on my opponent going through my attacks. So what we want to do ideally is to bring the elbow across the center line. If you can do that, you get all those moves that we looked at in the previous series, the side scissor series. Your opponent knows that and strongly resists. So what I'm going to do, I'm not going to bring his elbow across the center line. I'm just going to bring it towards the center line. Just so long as Mateus's elbows are inside my hip, that is enough for me to come up and lock my guard over his shoulder, the so-called top lock. Once my leg goes over Mateus's shoulder and I lock my feet, we've gone from a closed guard to a top lock situation. The top lock creates control at the end of the lever, so when my opponent goes to pull away, it's shockingly difficult. And you can hold people in, break their posture, etc., etc. When he tries to yank his arm out, this too is shockingly difficult. As my hips rise, his elbow runs into my hips and hamstring and becomes very difficult to pull away from. So, if I can't get the elbow across the center line, I can always bring it towards the center line. And if I can bring the elbow inside the hip, you can start hitting a lot of top locks on tough resisting opponents. So what we're going to do here is we're going to go in and get a cross cuff grip. I'm going to take his hand, and as we saw in the previous series, we're going to break his grip on the cloth by just covering the knuckles with the heel of our hand. And as a result, we can start getting a break on the grip. Now I start focusing on drawing his elbow forward towards my sternum so that the elbow may not pass the center line all the way to a side scissor, but at least it's getting close to the center line. That's all I need. Now from here, we're just going to go across and find ourselves in a situation where I can take some kind of collar grip. Here I'm using a reverse collar grip, just like so. And then we're going to go through and we're going to lock over our training partner's shoulder. Now when Mateus goes to yank out, I just raise my hips. If my hips are lazy down on the floor, he can pull through. It's not the end of the world because he can still hit triangles, but it's not ideal. I raise my pelvis like so. When he goes to yank out, it's a difficult thing. Now from here, if he's naive and just stays where he is, I can hit an arm lock directly out of this position. It's not the strongest arm lock in the world, but it's not bad. So he has to go into a defensive figure of four to try and alleviate that danger. We'll come back to that very shortly. Okay, so once again, we start off, we take a cuff grip on our training partner, just like so, and we start drawing my training partner's elbow forward. Okay, now from here, I go across. Here I'm using a reverse cross collar grip. We'll talk about other grips very shortly, but this is a good starting position. And then from here, we go through and we throw our calf muscle over our training partner's shoulders and we lock our ankles. As he goes to yank away from me, not an easy thing to do. And we now have achieved a top lock. Even if he goes to stand up now, we have so much control at the end of the lever that when he tries to pull me up off the floor, it won't be an easy thing. Okay, and from here, we'll be ready soon to start our attacks. So once again, the idea of what is a top lock is any situation where my opponent's elbows are taken close to but not across the center line, and as a result we can throw a calf muscle over the trapezius and shoulder and lock our ankles. Okay, as a result we have control of the end of the lever high up on the spine, so that as our opponent goes to posture up and away, it's difficult. When he goes to rip his elbow free, we raise the pelvis, the hips come up into a straight line. And then from here, when he goes to yank out, move out, etc., it won't be easy. And we're in a perfect position to launch the attacks that we'll soon be looking at. Okay? Now, we're looking at the idea of going into a top lock and controlling the top of our opponent's head and spine, the end of the lever, with our legs. This will take you from a neutral guard position into a somewhat dominant, not strongly dominant, but somewhat dominant bottom position, the top lock. In order to get into a top lock, we're going to need some kind of effective grip upon our opponent. Okay, if I just have my feet locked around my training partner's waist like so, and my opponent flares his elbows, there's no way I'm ever going to get into a top lock because his elbows are blocking my hips. Okay, there's simply no way for me now to get up to a top lock. We always need his elbows inside the hip. Only then will it be possible for us to come over the top and lock our feet over our training partner's shoulder and get into a classic top lock position. Okay. So the onus is on us is to develop gripping strategies which enable us to bring an elbow to the inside position. The other thing that will stop us getting top locks is our opponent's head posture. If the head is far, far up, it becomes very, very difficult indeed to get into a top lock. So we need our training partner's body forward at roughly 45 degrees. If he comes too far forward, he's too close for me to get a top lock. So optimally, we want his upper body at roughly 45 degrees, like so. And at the same time, we want an elbow inside our hip. If we have a body at 45 degrees and an elbow inside the hip, even with no hands, we could easily go over the top and quickly lock up a top lock like so. So the onus is on us to put his upper body at 45 degrees and get his elbow inside the hip. And what we need is an effective gripping strategy to make that possible. There is one grip which is, in my opinion, by far and away the best for making this happen. And in order for me to illustrate that to you, we're going to have to go to standing position and start to address the idea of an overclasp grip. Okay, if I had Mateus standing here in front of me, just like so, this side forward, and we've both got our hands up and we're ready to grip. You'll notice that I have my right side forward and Mateus has his left side forward. Okay, when he comes out and takes a lapel grip on my body like so, I have a choice now between going underneath his arm in this situation and going over his arm to get to his lapel. Okay, so if I go underneath and grip, I have what we call now an underclasp, where my lapel grip goes underneath my opponent's grip. So I'm clasping his lapel in the under position. This has several important advantages that we'll be looking at when we investigate the standing position later on in this video series. The most important of which is it gives me inside elbow position. My elbow goes inside his. It's relatively easy for me, even in situations where he goes to finagle his elbow inside mine, for me to flick over the top and get my elbow and shoulder inside his. And as a result, when we put a second hand on our training partner, we are now able to start drawing our training partner forward and getting him out of balance, okay? Because my arm is inside his. When he tries to push me away, it's very, very difficult for him, given that I have the inside position, to prevent movement, which will now enable me to start throwing my opponent. I can control my opponent's head by taking my hand up high towards his ear, like so. And that kind of direct head control will create many situations where we can start throwing people very, very strongly from this position, okay? Because I have the underclasp, it's easy for me to get my elbow inside, and from here, start to control my training partner's head, okay? Now, sometimes you can't get to an underclasp. Why? Because your opponent comes out, takes his grip, and from here, when I try to go underneath, his elbow comes down and blocks me. And I find it very, very difficult now to get through and get to a working grip. In situations like this, we can use an overclasp, where I go over my training partner's arm, just like so. But do you remember what we just said about underclasps? Now, he can start to use his elbow to get inside mine and bring his hand up high and control my head. So what do I want to do? I want to control my training partner's arm and get my elbow inside his. So now, even though I have an overclasp, can you see how I'm controlling Mateus's elbow? And from here, it's going to be very easy for me now to go into grips where I can go on the attack with my training partner. Okay? So once again, we have an opponent gripping our gi just like so. I have a choice between underclasps, which have the idea of inside position built into them, and overclasp, where I go over and outside. But I can still finagle my elbow over the top of his elbow and create tremendous downward pressure, which can make it very difficult for an opponent to work effectively against me. And from here, we can go into many forms of attack. Okay? This is something we do a lot in the standing position. And the important point here is that this has direct ramifications for what we do down on the floor. We can also use overclasps to great effect when it's time to get a top lock. But it's going to be a different kind of overclasp. Let's say my opponent had a strong lapel grip, and like so. We can also take an overclasp to a cross grip, just like so. And when my opponent makes a strong resisting pushing arm, look how I can kill my opponent's elbow position very easily by taking this cross grip across his body. So often, grip a sleeve, you'll have opponents who make things difficult for you by stiff arming, and you feel it's very, very hard to be effective in these positions. But if I go over the top and put my elbow and make a strong stiff arm, look how easily I can bend Mateus's arm. And then from situations like this, I kill his arm with my cross grip over grip, the over clasp. And as a result, we'll be able to work very effectively from positions like so. Okay. Now, let's take this down to the floor. Armed with that little bit of knowledge about the usefulness of overclasps for breaking our opponent's elbow downwards from the top, let's look at how we can use this to get into a top lock. Okay, from here, Mateus comes in and starts gripping up probably the single most common grip when people go to pass and work inside our guard. If I go under Mateus's arm, he can come down and crush my arm, and I can't use it effectively now. Okay, so the underclasp isn't particularly effective in this situation. So instead, what we're going to do is we're going to open up our training partner's lapel, and we're going to draw our training partner inwards, and we're going to get a good grip up high so that my thumb is behind Mateus's ear. When he tries to stiff arm me, I can easily use my overclasp to break his posture. Okay, look how my overclasp elbow dominates his elbow. Even as he goes to stiff arm me and straighten up and keep his posture, I pull with my legs and I use my overclasp to easily break his posture and defeat his attempts to posture upwards. My overclasp goes down on his elbow and breaks the arm inwards. Okay, not breaking the arm, but breaking the posture of his body. Okay, now we can combine this with a cross cuff grip here on my training partner. And all I'm going to do is start pulling inwards, just like so. I bring everything across so that even though his elbow doesn't pass the center line, his hand comes to my center line. The elbow doesn't pass the center line, but the hand does. And then from here, I bring my head outside, my hand contours around my training partner's neck. And as a result, we have excellent control of the head. If I get lazy with my cross grip and just start coming down here, it has very little control over his posture. He postures up, and you can see my cross grip isn't doing a lot of good. Okay, but when I take the extra distance to pull in with my legs and get my hand all the way behind the neck, now as he goes to posture up and uses his right arm to stiffen out and straighten, look how I can easily control distance and his arm. And my overclasp, strong arm, defeats his locked elbow. His elbow is locked out, but my elbow on top of it, combined with a pull of my legs, easily breaks him forwards and down. Now my two elbows pull in opposing directions, like I was trying to tear something, like so. So my cross grip and my cross collar grip and my cross cuff grip pull him down and forward. And as a result, it's very, very easy for me to lock my feet over Mateus's shoulder. Now, as Mateus tries to pull away from me, you see you have excellent control of your opponent's posture. You've got the top lock in place, and we're ready to start the game of attacking out of the top lock. So this is probably the single strongest gripping strategy to get into this position. Let's look at it from a different angle. Okay, I want you guys to be effective on someone on two knees getting to a top lock. He's got what is, without any question, the most popular grip in the sport of jiu-jitsu for passing guard, okay, which is this one hand on two lapels grip. This does a good job of enabling him to control my ability to sit up and form angles. It's a very useful grip, okay? So we go on top of his wrist and we get a cross cuff grip. I feed his hand towards the center line, and I take my second hand, and as my legs pull inwards, I get all the way behind his neck with my cross collar grip. Now as he tries to use a strong, stiff, resisting arm, look how I pull with my two legs and I dominate his elbow with my elbow. And as a result, I can quickly shimmy my legs up his back and go directly into a top lock. Okay. Now as Mateus tries to pull away from me, I completely control distance with the top lock, the cross collar grip, and I control elbow position with my cross cuff grip, just like so. As my opponent goes to stand up, move away, pull me up off the floor, all those things that people like to do, he finds it incredibly difficult. Mateus is going to move around spontaneously, pulling away from me, posturing up, all those things that people do. And I just pull in with my legs, and you've got a strong, tenacious grip on your opponent, which is going to start translating, as we'll soon see, into very, very strong attacks from closed guard. So this is arguably the single best gripping strategy that we can employ when we're working with a jacket to bring our opponent into a top lock, from where we can start to go into strong attacks from bottom position. Understand that the top lock is another fine example of a dominant bottom position. Just, it's not quite as dominant It's a side scissor, but it's still pretty damn good. And it's a lot better than just working directly from a closed guard situation, which by its very nature is a neutral position. It's not a bad position, but it's neutral. It's a good holding position. It's a good place to hold and control people. But we want to be dominant from closed guard situations rather than neutral. And one of the best ways to go from neutrality to dominance is to make that switch from closed guard, plain vanilla closed guard, into a top lock situation. Now, we're looking at the idea of the top lock as another excellent, mildly dominant position from closed guard scenarios, which we can use prior to attacking, which is going to increase your chance of success in live situations against knowledgeable, resisting opponents, so you can be more successful out there on the mat. We looked at the number one gripping strategy to get to the top lock. I may start bringing in some more gripping strategies for you that are also very effective, but the one we just looked at, cross cuff with an overclasp and leading to a cross collar, that's the number one method of breaking our opponent's posture and getting to a top lock. Now, as you probably guessed, the number one attack out of a top lock is always going to be an armbar, jujigatame. It's a fantastic way to control our opponent's head and shoulders and prevent most of the usual escapes to jujigatames that often occur when we just go straight from a closed guard. So, for example, if I have Mateus here in my closed guard, if I just try to go directly from a situation where my feet are around my opponent's lower back and then get some kind of control of my training partner's arm, put a foot on the hip, and bring a leg up high, and then bring my leg over my training partner's head. This is a kind of a Jiu-Jitsu 101 method. It's not a bad method in a beginner's class for attacking jujigatame, but it has some obvious problems associated with it. I have no real control of my opponent's shoulders and head, okay? And as a result, my opponent can see the foot on the hip, feel the leg coming up the back, and he can start posturing up, pulling the elbow, etc., and you feel now your armbar completely deteriorates, and now you're in a compromised position. Okay. Contrast this with a top lock. Once we get to a top lock up here, the amount of distance that I have to cover to get into an armbar now is minimal. Just a tiny shift from one shoulder across to the other shoulder, and we're in business. As opposed to shifting all the way from the lower back, it's a big movement, a lot of space, and as a result, easy for my opponent to pull his arm free as I attempt to move. Okay, so the top lock is a fine way of getting shoulder control prior to the actual lock. We've seen that in situations where my opponent is gripping up, we go over the top and take a cross cuff grip. We bring our elbow over his elbow, we pull in with our two legs, and then from this situation, we get a very strong cross collar grip, all the way up behind our training partner's neck. When he tries to stiff arm me off, it's so difficult under these circumstances. I turn my body onto its side, like so. If I'm squared up to my opponent and he pushes, I feel my arm getting extended. So we always want our body out here on its side. And as a result, we can now pull in with our arms, shimmy our hips, and we lock up, and we've got a very, very firm control of our opponent. As he goes to stand up, pull away, move out, do all those things that people do, standing up to his feet, yanking me up off the floor, my knees pull inwards, and the lock gets tighter and tighter. Now, if your opponent knows that jujigatame is about to come, they're all going to do the same thing. They're going to take their other arm, and they're going to lock into their bicep, and they're going to put a figure of 4 with their arms. This means that when I make a transition into the jujigatame, he's in the perfect position to defend himself. And now, with his arms locked like so, it's very, very hard for me to actually go out and extend my opponent's arm into a full arm lock. Okay? You make your opponent's defensive job much easier when you allow him to lock the figure of 4 with his arms. Okay? So what we want to do is prevent that. I don't care if my opponent locks his hands. That's fine. You can still break your opponent's arm with locked hands. But I do care if he locks figure 4 grips with his arms like so. So what are we going to do? We're going to come in, take our cross cuff grip. We're going to bring his hand to the center line. We're going to bring our hand all the way around, getting the behind the collar and ear with our grip, and as a result we're able to shimmy our hips out to the side and lock up a strong top lock like so. Now I'm going to take my hand that was the cuff grip and I'm going to go wrist to wrist. I'm going to put my wrist on top of his. Now when my opponent goes to lock the figure 4 with the arms, he finds it significantly more difficult. He can't make that full figure of 4 that he wanted to. And as a result, I can shimmy around the corner and touch my foot to the back of his head. Now, from here, I pass my foot over the top and we lock. When he tries to achieve a solid figure of 4, all he gets is his forearm. And from here, as my hips come up, the arm extends and we get very strong braking pressure on our training partner's arm. Okay. I'll demonstrate it this time on a standing opponent. From here, we go over the top and we get that very, very useful cross collar grip. I take the cross cuff grip, I break my training partner's body down towards the floor, turn onto my side, and then from here, we lock up our feet. As Mateus goes into a standing situation and tries hard to pull away from me, etc., etc. Look how I take my foot to the back of Mateus's head. And then from here, we make that short transition from one shoulder across to the other shoulder and lock over the top. Because I control his wrist, when he goes to lock the figure of 4, it's physically impossible. All he can do is close his hands together. That will not stop me from this situation. As we tie up our training partner's inner wrist, our pelvis comes up, and we find ourselves applying a very, very strong lock to our opponent. Such is the strength of the position, with my 2 feet going down towards the mat, that even as Mateus goes to yank out and I have both hands, you'll see I won't lose control of the arm. If my legs start extending and he pulls, I lose the arm every time. So it's super important from here that our 2 feet point downwards. I'm not going to say it's 100% wrong to cross your feet in this situation. However, cross feet do typically lead to straightened legs. And as a result, Mateus can pull out much more easily than he ought to. Okay? So for this particular kind of armbar, there are other armbars where cross feet are a good idea. But from bottom position, I generally favor open feet with my 2 feet pointing towards each other, just like so. So I don't cross them. I want them sharply bent so that my feet point down and my knees are higher than my feet. Now when he goes to pull out, even with no hands, it's very, very difficult. Then we connect wrist to wrist, and as my feet go down and my knees go up, we get very, very strong braking pressure. So once again, this time, Mateus on 2 knees, we go through, we take this incredibly useful grip coming up onto our side, and then we go through, we take the cross cuff grip as well. When Mateus goes to pull away from me, it's so difficult. And now this is what makes it possible for us to put the top lock in order. Now I go through and I control my training partner's wrist. As Mateus tries to yank his arm free, it's such a difficult thing. Now I touch my foot towards the back of his head, pass my leg over the top, my 2 feet go down low, my hips come up high, he tries to posture up and pull away and do both posturing up, head coming up, and from here we're in the perfect position to exert braking pressure on our training partner's arm. The acid test is with no hands, can he pull out or not? Make a strong body, posturing up. From here, with my feet lower than my knees, when he goes to pull up, even with no hands, he can't do it, okay? If your foot position fails you and you're in Judogatame, and my feet are higher than my knees, crossed like so, look how easily from here, even when I pinch my knees, he pulls out so easily, okay? It has much more to do, rather than squeezing knees together, with rather the back heel of my feet down low, pointing down towards the floor and my pelvis coming high. Now when he goes to pull free, even when my knees are apart, if the hips go high and the feet go, it's much, much harder for him to pull away, okay? But knees together, pinching as hard as you want, mean nothing if the feet are in poor position. So one more time. We have a strong resisting opponent. We bring everything in and we fix up those grips on our training partner. Very often I'll go in here first and get this useful grip. Then I come in, we lock up. Mateus goes to yank away, pull away, etc., etc. And from here, we go over the top and lock. From this position, he tries to yank out. Look how I cover the wrist. My foot points to the back of his head. Second leg goes over, and then 2 feet pulling back and inwards, a strong back heel. Where both feet retract very, very strongly. Now as he goes to yank away, it's so damn difficult. And from here, we easily go into a finishing position. So these are some of the key ideas involved in a strong Judigatami arm lock attack out of a top lock. Understand that you could, on a naive opponent, just go directly from a closed guard into an armbar. But also understand that I'm not interested in you armbarring naive opponents. I'm interested in your ability to build a fundamental structure to your jiu-jitsu that will last you from white belt all the way through to advanced black belt. Start early with the right technique. Focus on controlling your opponent's shoulder first through the top lock and then getting to the Judigatami second. Don't just skip a step and go straight for it. Again, no one's interested in you tapping out white belts. They're interested in you one day tapping out world champion black belts. Start early with the right technique and you'll find you have a lot more success out there on the mats. Now, let's look at one of the premier methods of controlling an opponent's posture that sets up attacks from closed guard bottom. In particular, attacks out of a top lock. This is a move which I often refer to my students as the 45 inside. First off, what is a 45 inside? If I have an opponent in my closed guard, it's very much in his interests to be postured up and away from me. Typically, they'll be looking to get grips on the lapel, perhaps a sleeve, or hips and pants, just like so. And from here, their body will be more or less upright. Because their body is so upright, it becomes quite difficult for me to control the head and shoulders in ways that set up submission holds. It's difficult for me to sit up because he controls my posture through his lead hand. And it's difficult for me to walk my legs up into effective arm lock positions because his body's so upright. And it's relatively simple from here for my opponent to start getting up to his feet and causing problems for me. So, what I would want, rather than my opponent postured up successfully like this, is a situation where his body is brought forward at roughly 45 degrees. Once the body is brought forward like this, I can start walking my legs much more successfully up my training partner's back than when he's in a very upright posture. I don't want my opponent too close to me, like so, because now it's hard for me to hit submission holds. He's so close to me here that this is more like a stalling position, where it's hard for me to form angles on my opponent to set up arm locks and triangles, etc. He's just too close to me. He's, in a sense, he's smothered my attacks. So what we don't want is too much distance in posture from where he's so far away from me and his posture so vertical that it's hard for me to get effective attacks, and I don't want him smothering me. Somewhere between getting smothered and getting your opponent too far away and too high in his posture, there's a happy medium from where most of our submission attacks from closed guard work very, very well. And that angle is typically 45 degrees. When my opponent's body is sloped forward at around 45 degrees, this provides the optimum level where I can successfully walk my legs up my training partner's back into advantage positions, like so. But at the same time, he's not so close that he smothers the various attacks that we like to work from this position. So 45 degrees is the optimum. How do I maintain a 45 degree angle on my opponent? Well, probably the single best and most effective way for us to do this is with a cross lapel grip, like so. Okay, when you get that cross collar grip on your opponent, it governs distance very effectively. If he tries to come forward and smother my attacks, his own lapel will stop him. If he tries to pull away, I just bring the elbow down and it keeps him locked at 45 degrees. When he tries to posture up something close to vertical, it's very, very difficult. And you can combine knee pull and cross collar to really hold him in place. So this is an incredibly effective way to control and manage distance and keep your opponent's posture at the ideal of 45 degrees. Once you get your opponent broken down, into a 45 degree angle, the best thing for him to start doing is blocking your hips with his elbows. And now you won't be able to get angle on your opponent to actually get submission holds to work. So when you've broken posture, he's got to prevent you getting angle. Okay. Remember, our algorithm is always attack his posture and balance first, and then get your angle second, and then start getting into your attacks. Okay. So how are we going to prevent our opponent from stopping us moving our hips to an advantageous angle by taking his elbows to the outside of our hips? How are we going to stop that? We're going to do it by ensuring that our opponent's elbow is always inside our hip, okay? And the single best way for us to do this is to take cross cuff grips, where I take my right hand to my training partner's right sleeve cuff, just like so. If we move to an angle, once I get this grip and I hold across the body, when Mateus tries to bring his elbow outside of my hip, it's extremely difficult because you're holding and controlling him here. A line of tension runs through my training partner's jacket, and when he tries to bring the elbow outside the hip, it's a difficult thing to achieve. We can use this cross cuff grip to ensure that we get situations where we always keep his elbow inside our hip. And if the elbow is inside the hip and the posture is broken forward at 45 degrees, there's no reason why we can't transfer to a top lock. And once we go from a closed guard to a top lock, when he tries to pull away from us and move away and do all those things that people do, it's going to be a difficult thing. And our various submission holds come a lot easier from top locks than they do from just a basic closed guard. Okay? So essentially, we've got two key elements when we want to attack with top locks when our opponent's down on two knees. We've got to keep him bent over at 45 degrees. We've got to keep his elbows inside our hips, so the 45 inside position. Now, the big question is, how are you going to hold this on someone who's actively fighting against you? Let's start with the notion of an overclasp. Okay, we're in standing position, like so, and my opponent has a strong lapel grip and stiff arms my body out like so. You can see it's hard for me to be effective against that stiff arm, like a strong, stiff pushing arm, and it's hard for me now to pull his body in. But what if I put my arm over his arm, and then from here I took a cross lapel grip that put my elbow on top of his elbow, so that we had an overclasp. My arm's on top of his, and my elbow's positioned right on top of his elbow. When he goes to stiff arm me under these conditions, I can always bend his stiff arm and break his posture, because my elbow dominates his from the top with that cross grip overclasp. Okay? Let's contrast this with another form of stiff arm. If I just take my hand and grab same side, and he stiff arms me from this position, it feels like his stiff arm is very, very effective, very strong, and works against me, because my elbow is not on top of his elbow. But if I put my elbow on top of his, like a strong resistant arm, I can easily bend my training partner's elbow and break his stiff arm. So always it's about that elbow position. And if I can use my elbow on top of his, I can easily dominate his arm and break his posture. Okay, you can get right through the stiff arm, whether I work with straight grips or whether I work with cross grips. So again, he's got a strong resistant arm. If I just try to pull him in here, I feel the full effects of his stiff arm. But if I go over the top, I can easily bend the stiff arm. And now from situations like this, I could probably easily turn on my opponent and throw in various directions. Okay? You've removed that annoying stiff arm, which makes it so difficult for me to get close to my opponent. Here I have no capacity to get through a stiff arm, and he easily holds me off. The second we get the overclasp, now we can easily remove that stiff, annoying defensive arm, and from here we'll be able to throw in all sorts of different directions. Okay? Now we can use this down on the floor. Someone's in my closed guard, and they've got a good grip, like so. If I take the wrong hand and I go in my right versus his right, like a strong resisting arm, and I try to pull and break his posture, nothing happens. Okay, I'll never break his posture this way. It's just me pulling against his stiff arm. His arm is locked out. Okay, so what I want to do in these circumstances is to take an overclasp. So I take my arm over his, and I go through, and I get my elbow on top of his elbow. Now, when he tries to stiff arm me, look how I can easily break the posture of his stiff arm. I take my elbow over his, I knee pull, and it's just so easy to break his posture down to the mat. Again, like a strong resistant arm, pushing down hard. If I go right versus right, strong, and I try to pull in, it's worthless. Okay? But if I go elbow over and block, strong resisting arm, now I can easily break his posture. Okay? At the same time, I want to make sure that I keep his elbows inside my hip. So I go through underneath and I take this cross cuff grip. I create tension running down my training partner's jacket. And then from here, I go over the top and I get the hand in. So I have the cross lapel grip and I have the cuff grip. The cross lapel means that when he tries to posture up, I can easily break his posture forward. The cross cuff grip means that when he tries to bring his elbow outside my hip, he physically can't do so. And so we have this perfect control of our training partner, which enables us to walk our legs up and achieve a tight top lock. When he goes to yank out, it's such a difficult thing to do. And as a result, we're in the perfect position now to start tying our training partner up and going into the various attacks that we favor from closed guard. Okay? So, seen from a different angle. The 45 inside. My opponent gets pretty standard grip configurations to work with in closed guard. We go through, make a lapel feed. I go in over the top, and I get a good deep overclasp on my opponent. Now, I come in here and grip. When he tries to posture up, make a strong resistant body, I knee pull, break the stiff arm, keep the elbow inside. He tries to yank away from me. It's a difficult thing. And then from here, we easily achieve the top lock that we're looking for. When he goes to pull away from the top lock, the knee pull from the top lock position is incredibly difficult to work away from. From here, legs come up and over, and we're in a winning position, ready to apply our arm locks. Once again, 45 inside. From here, I go over the top and fix up my cross lapel grip. I go through, tie up, and I start to bend that stiff resisting arm. He goes to stiff arm me off. Okay, all your strengths, Mateus. From here, we lock up our feet, and from here we can easily pull our opponent down and lock up a tight top lock. Once we get to a top lock position like so, he goes to yank out. It won't be easy. Everything's locked in place, the legs go over, and we're in a winning position. We can also reverse the order a little. Sometimes we'll start right down here at our training partner's cuff. And then from this position, I just use the slack in the jacket to start moving the elbows across, and we go through and bring the elbow over the top of our training partner. Now we fix up our grip and lock. So we don't always have to go cross grip first. Sometimes we go cross cuff first. He locks up. Look how the gi has a certain amount of slack in it. No matter how he gathers up the two sleeves, so the two lapels, there's always a certain amount of slack in it. And from here, it's not that difficult for us to start pulling across the body, starting or initiating at the cuff. Just like so. And as a result, the hand goes in. We break our training partner's posture using that overclasp and lock up. When he goes to pull away from us, it's a difficult thing to achieve. Foot goes high, leg goes over, and we're in a winning position. So whether we go at the lapel first or whether we go at the cuff first, we can be very effective with this. Okay, we go in, strong, establish our grips, use that overclasp, and switch from a closed guard to a top lock. And once we get the top lock, Judogatami, which we'll be looking at in more detail very shortly, is a very, very useful option. Used in this way, the 45 inside is one of the premier ways of controlling an opponent's posture through gripping when they're in a closed guard, down on two knees. We can keep them broken down to an extent where we can realistically get our feet walking up their spine. So we're no longer controlling the short end of the lever. We get to a top lock where we're controlling the long end of the lever. And as a result, you'll have an easy time controlling your opponent's head and shoulders and setting up your arm lock attacks. Okay, let's start going into some of the details of Judogatami, the armbar, out of closed guard, and start looking at how we can make this progress from top lock into the actual armbar. It's a little different doing it with a jacket on, not massively different. The lower body mechanics are identical from gi to no gi, but the gripping sequences are just a little different when we work with the jacket on. So let's have a look at the small details that make an armbar work from bottom position. Okay. As much as possible, when we work with the armbar from bottom, we want to minimize the distance that our legs have to move, okay? You'll often see in a beginner's class people working arm bars where they just control behind their training partner's sleeves and elbows, and you see them engaging in kind of big movements to throw the legs from one side of the body over to the other, and using momentum to turn around the corner to try and throw the legs up into juji. Okay, that's fine as a beginner's drill to get people moving to angles, etc., etc. But realistically, that's not going to happen in a competitive situation where your opponent knows what an armbar is and doesn't want you to armbar them. What we want to do is to create a tight set of sequences that inhibit our opponent's ability to move, and then minimize the distance we have to travel to get to the arm lock. The smaller the distance you have to travel, the less reaction time he has to start pulling arms out, posturing up, and doing all the things that people do to avoid arm locks. Okay. Now, the single best way to minimize the distance you have to travel into an arm lock is to break it into 2 steps, so that you go from a closed guard, here, your starting position, to a top lock, where we lock our closed guard over one of our training partner's shoulders. Now, this means that when it's time to rotate, the rotation is relatively small. And from here, I can transfer from one shoulder to the other shoulder. And the only distance I have to travel is from Mateus's right shoulder to the left shoulder with my knee. That's a tiny, tiny distance, and there's very little time for my opponent to successfully pull away and defend the lock, as opposed to where I travel from his lower back all the way up into an armbar. This takes a huge amount of movement, where I go from the lower back and the hips all the way around here. There's a ton of time and space for my opponent to pull his right arm out, and we end up with nothing. So we want to minimize that distance we have to travel. The single best way for us to do this is to lock over the shoulders. Okay. Now, just one tiny movement from one shoulder across to the other, and it's very, very hard for our opponent to pull free. Because of the action of my right leg pushing down, even when I make the movement, it's so difficult for my opponent, even if he goes to yank his arm out now, it's difficult in the time available to avoid the arm lock. Okay. So that's the big picture that we're trying to work with here. Now, how are we going to make this work? Well, let's start it with the 45 inside. We start off with our training partner, we go through, and we tie up the arm. I come in, and we get our initial grip here on our training partner. When he goes to yank out and away from us, it's such a difficult thing to do when you have these 2 grips pulling in opposite directions. It's like a pull across your body, okay? So there's the cross cuff grip, there's the cross lapel grip. He goes to yank out, such a difficult thing. Now we start walking our legs up the body. My knee goes up the lat muscle. The second leg is my climbing leg. And that's the one which enables us to get our knee on top of his shoulder. If we just turn. Okay. I don't just want to throw my legs from closed guard to top lock. Okay. We rather want to work our way up. So I bring a leg to the middle back. I bring my knee on top of his shoulder. So even here, if we went to yank away, there'd be a blocking force from my left knee. Then we place the knee on top of the shoulder and we lock our feet. Now the key, I take my hips up. If my hips are down and he pulls his elbow, he can still free his elbow. So we want to make sure when we achieve a top lock, hips high. Now when he goes, even with no hands, he goes to pull his elbow free, it's so damn difficult, okay? Now, from this position, we've still got our hand inside our training partner's lapel. We walk our body up, lock our top lock, and hips high, strong body. And from here, my own hand now will get in the way. My own left hand will get in the way of my arm lock. So this is the time for us to start coming down to the wrist. I take my hand free, just like so, and I just post it on my training partner's shoulder. So I remove the cross lapel grip and we switch to a shoulder post. I take my wrist down to his wrist so that the veins of my wrist cover the veins of his wrist. So when he tries to lock a defensive figure of 4, the best he can do is essentially lock his hands, and that won't be enough to stop me. Now as we shoulder post, strong body Mateus, from here I touch my foot to the back of his neck, and then I make the turn where I windshield wiper off my training partner's shoulder so that I go from in front of him out to the side. And this is what enables us to go over the top and pull in with the legs, okay? Make a stronger body so you don't flop around. So we come in, there's our initial grip, there's the cross collar grip, which enables us to draw him forward. Now from here, leg goes up the back. So we go from closed guard, leg goes up the back, cover the shoulder, turn, and lock. Okay, my top lock pulls him in towards us. I cover veins of the wrist on the veins of his wrist. So when he tries to lock the figure of four, the most he can do is connect his hands. That won't be able to stop me. Take the hand out, shoulder post. Then the pivot off the shoulder. Right, windshield wiper off. So that my 2 feet face in the same direction. Now from here, we bring the leg over the top. Strong, strong. From here, my knee is higher than his ear. If my knee is below his ear, that's when people start pulling away from us. So let's turn in this direction. So notice how my knee goes higher than his ear. If my knee is below his ear, he can posture up and away and escape. So it's super important under these circumstances that my knee ends up higher than his ear and my 2 feet close together. The further my 2 feet apart, the more he can posture up and cause problems. So it's super important that this foot here, my direction foot, points the direction over his head. Strong body. So we go in this direction like so. Okay. Now you have excellent control of your opponent's body. When he tries to lock his hands defensively, the most he can do is just connect his hands. What I don't want is this, a full figure of four. He can't do that if his hand is connected to my chest. When he tries to lock a figure of four now, it's physically impossible. All he can do is connect hands, and that won't stop the drive of my hips into a finish. Figure four will stop my ability to drive. Okay, I can lift my hips all I want, he'll be able to defend himself. But if we can just connect here and he locks, then from this position, we get a very strong arm lock. So once again, we start off like so. We go through and catch. He tries to pull away from us. It's not easy from 45 inside. Now from here, we walk our legs up, we get on top of the shoulders, we get our top lock in place. We come in, we go to a shoulder post. He's presumably trying to defend his hands at this point. From this position, we take our foot to the back of his neck, we bring our leg up higher than his shoulder, and then from this position, it's almost impossible for him to defend successfully. Okay? My 2 feet stay very close together. Try to avoid crossing your feet for now. Just bring the feet like so. Even when he goes to posture up, move around, all those things that people do, standing up to his feet. It won't be difficult for us now to hook inside our training partner's legs, break their posture, and bring our feet directly over his head and into a winning position. Okay? Let's tie all these loose strands together. My opponent's here in my closed guard. We immediately start off with the 45 inside. He goes to yank out. It's not an easy thing to get away from. We start shifting, walking up the shoulders, and applying our top lock. As he goes to yank away, not an easy thing. Even if he goes to stand up now, it means very little. From here, look how we take our shoulders around the corner. So my 2 feet point in the same direction. My direction foot is directly over his head, and it's that which enables us to connect his knuckles to our chest, just like so. Now, the one transition from one shoulder to the other puts my knee higher than his ear, and as a result, we're in perfect position now to go through into a strong arm lock finish. In this way, we can fully take advantage of the 45 inside position and the top lock that comes out of it. If you can consistently hold your opponent in the 45 inside, get your legs up into a high top lock that controls the head and shoulders, and then make that transition that minimizes the distance your legs have to travel from one shoulder to the other, you're going to arm lock a lot of people out of closed guard.